Adam, are you there?
Hello, Brian.
We are getting subtitles now.
I can't hear you if you can hear me.
And not only can I hear you, I can actually see you being subtitled. Do we have an option to turn that off? Twitter? Yes.
I'll just tell you. Oh, now I can hear you.
Yeah, it's the thing we do.
It's the thing.
Shtick. It's the shtick. And the shtick was complete with Twitter Spaces once again crapping out of me as soon as I started the space.
Huh.
Which happens literally every time. I made the arguably the mistake of checking for an app update before, like 2 minutes beforehand, which is always a recipe.
I don't think that's a mistake. I think we've been burned when we haven't done that. And I would say that
I've been burned both ways, I feel.
Well, I feel like Twitter Spaces is becoming a less effective torturer in that its failure modes are all sort of known. You know what I mean? I feel like when it would really get us was when we would get something new or different or sporadic each time.
It was a bit of a roulette wheel.
Yeah. And this time it's like, okay, it's doing the thing it does. Like your thing crashes. I can't hear you. And then, it settles in. And
it's the little Abbott and Costello routine for Twitter Spaces. Yeah, exactly. Does every Twitter Space have this problem? If so, I would like to just dial into new Twitter Spaces just so I can listen to other hosts going through this because it's kind of amusing.
Yeah,
I don't know. No.
Good answer. For you. I don't know. Go
Good for you. Yeah, that's what you want to spend your time.
Actually, I see fewer Twitter Spaces these days. I don't know about you, but fewer of them seem to pop up than once upon a time.
Okay, how correlated do you think that is to the crypto collapse? Because I feel like so many of those were about crypto, right?
Spot on. No, I had not thought about it, but yes, I feel like most of them were like, get your NFTs here.
All right, so I'm going to invite a bunch of people to speak. Not all of them will be Googlers or ex-Googlers, because otherwise this is going to turn into a Zoogler therapy session. I mean, God bless it. I do love the Zooglers.
Some of my best friends, yes.
Some of my best friends are Zooglers, exactly. Okay, so we are here because, true to essentially everybody's predictions, Stadia. How do you pronounce that?
Stadia, right? Surely. Stadium? Surely?
Nadir, look, I'm sorry. So yeah, Stadia. Yeah, I want to punch myself in the mouth for saying Stadia. What kid would not get beaten up for saying Stadia? All right, Stadia, clearly Stadia. The writing was on the wall for this one, I feel, when they launched it. I mean, this is...
Absolutely. I don't know. I feel like just the premise of it seemed far-fetched to me. I mean, what do I know? I mean, apparently plenty.
But you have gamers in your household, no?
Yes. So I guess I have that.
What do they think? What did they
literally
think?
What is Stadia? I've never heard of that. That was
okay.
that was the reaction I got.
All right, yeah, not necessarily
like
good.
You're making that up or pronouncing it wrong.
But I mean, it has been observed by many that inside the confines of Google, and I should say I've never worked for Google, so obviously those that have, correct me where this is incorrect, but it feels that it is well known that Google incentivizes the creation of new things and does not incentivize quite as much the maintenance of existing things, to say the least. That Reddit comment was very true, and the other things I've seen as well. But it's very true to other things that we have certainly heard, and certainly this was true at Sun back in the day. Where, I mean, do you remember hearing what kind of the criteria were for staff engineer, Adam?
No. Oh dear.
So famously, Steve Kleinman, who went on to NetApp, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Was an early engineer at Sun, and famously he was promoted to staff engineer for vNodes. Like the idea of a vNode, like that is what the metric became. This was like the bar for staff engineering.
It's a good idea.
It is a good idea. It's definitely a good idea. It feels like it's a little. I feel like there's something almost tautological about. And as a company itself matures, I mean, a company will be in a greenfield where very large things are possible simply because they haven't been done yet. And then as the company matures, the things that are done are going to necessarily be, they're going to feel more incremental, but in fact, they're going to represent, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of hard work that needs to be done. It's just they feel less in terms of like new abstraction and so on. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think, and certainly at Sun, uh, it was easier to see the shiny new thing rather than the people, you know, making it real and fixing all the bugs and satisfying customers for sure.
So you had this idea that like, all right, well, if Steve Kleinman invented V notes, like, what did you do? And which I think is kind of incentivized people to do. And I think Sun did not have this as bad as most, but incentivizing people to do kind of big, grand things. And if you didn't feel like doing something big and grand, you were kind of like told you like, yeah, you're not going to get, you're kind of at the end of the line. And famously, I believe in Tom, I'm not sure if you knew Joel Eichel at Sun, but because I think Joel Eichel was also, I think, went to Ipsilon, I believe. But Joe kind of famously left because he was told like, yeah, you're kind of at the end of the line because you don't want to do something that's kind of grand and new, which is, I remember Jeff in particular was always very indignant about that because he felt it was the loss of a very good engineer because he was content to do very important engineering without inventing new abstraction, which I feel like we should incentivize engineers to do, right? That's, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if everyone, whatever, obviously everyone can't gather around the shiniest objects and you just do that only. I know at Joyent and now at Oxide, you didn't have engineering levels. I would say to just expose myself as a management dork a bit, at Delphix, we did have management levels, and we were very careful to make sure that things like staff and senior staff like applied equally across like QA and dev and different dev functions and so forth, and really tried to phrase it in terms of the breadth of impact and like how many people and customers and internal processes and those kinds of things to kind of steer people away from just the new shiny
okay,
thing.
so this is an interesting point because you're right. Like we don't have leveling. I didn't have leveling at Joyent as well. Is leveling, is that the original sin? Do we create these incentives because we have the levels?
Well, I think that, I mean, let me try this out on you. This might sound to Ryan Breslau, but I think people do whatever the culture that they're in
I think
rewards,
that's right. Yeah.
by and
Right.
large.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
Like just, squishy humans kind of react to other squishy humans, and that's what we do. And so, I was thinking about it at Oxide, and one of the things that is kind of a strong incentive is like demo day. People like having a thing to demo at demo day. And we also do a good job of, applauding not just the newest, shiniest, whizziest thing, but someone's test infrastructure that lets us robustly test some really annoying to test part of the system.
Totally. And I think, and so we do demos every Friday. It is totally unstructured. It is basically like it is a forum for people to demonstrate their work. Like there's no more structure to it than that. It's not, we don't grade people on it. People are not required to do it. Some people do it frequently, others do it infrequently, but there's no, it's just, but I do agree with you, Adam, that like we've had, folks join the company and they get kind of excited for when am I going to demo something? And they begin to kind of think of it in terms of that. And I think that that's broadly so far pretty healthy, right? You tell me if it's not.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, no, for sure. It seems very healthy. I think like any incentive and reward structure, it could be, we could be looking back in 5 years and thinking like, oh, geez, how did we get
Right.
here? Because I think that there are lots of incentive structures, I'm sure, like the one at Google, that didn't intend to create this kinds of effect where people scurry away from the thing after release, after they got promoted. But you can imagine managers kind of taking their reports aside and saying, okay, like you haven't demoed in a while. I really want to get you, more money or more kudos or more.
God, are you incentive in the future? This is so terrible.
A firmer pat on the head or whatever it is, and say like, let's focus on demo, which is not to say like that it necessarily will be perverted in that way, but you can see it happening, right?
Yeah.
And actually, that's most clear, I think, in my experience, in like sales organizations, where setting up a comp plan is a very complicated thing to do. And I think that often sales engineers sales folks are motivated by additional money, and they'll kind of optimize like protein folding. They're so efficient in finding the best way to like extract cash from a company.
Yeah.
And I think engineers are different in that, like, I think the motivations are often more complex, but still kind of find their own efficient ways to navigate it.
Yeah, and so just one thing I wonder is, as this domain has gone from, it has become more and more lucrative, have we perverted our incentives more and more? It feels like that way more people, I know people who've got plenty of money that have been really taught to care about even more money in a way that I don't understand.
It is sort of like the simplest. I mean, it's sort of the premise of capitalism. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about it, but
send me a memo.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like,
Is there an RFP on that?
Like, yeah. My wife works in an organization that one of the things they do is focus on CEO pay to motivate, outcomes, but also to motivate like ESG and environmental stuff and diversity and inclusion. So, they feel like CEOs kind of do what they're paid to do, and I think that's variously true for other folks. I don't know how ubiquitous that is in engineering or in Silicon Valley. I think there are a lot of other incentives that motivate people pretty strongly.
I think there are incentives that motivate people way more strongly. I mean, I think it's like, it is certainly speaking for me personally, I mean, yeah, it's like currency is great, money's great, but there are other, I mean, it is way more important for me to do something that is useful to other people, that is something that is useful to my peers, that is useful to customers, something like that. That I just get way more motivation out of that than.
In your career, have you ever had someone like put an incentive structure in place that had you not like fundamentally change behavior, but maybe kind of change priorities in some way?
Sure. Because after the acquisition, when Samsung acquired Joyent, they put in place a retention package that was a 3-year long retention package that was all, it was backloaded, which I view as an active, like, I view backloading any kind of incentive package as a very interesting kind of confession, which is like, look, this place kind of sucks. And the longer you're here, the more you're going to realize that. So I've actually got to pay you way more in these out years when you're going to be like in excruciating pain in order to compensate you for that. I mean, I just feel like that backloading, that kind of retention, I think like in retention itself is kind of peculiar, you know?
Well, and what it sounds like the behavior it motivated was not.
That's
great.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
No. I mean, it's important behavior, I guess, in some.
Yeah, cases. I mean, and it's actually in many ways was clarifying because like the most miserable year of my career was also the most lucrative. So it's like it definitely, and whereas like, okay, I feel like a responsibility to like my family to stay, but I'm definitely not happy. And so yeah, it did motivate me to do something that I wouldn't otherwise, and I was like disgusted by myself about it.
Yeah.
It didn't feel. It did not feel good.
We don't feel that way about you. Yeah.
Wait, why would you say that unless you did feel that way about me? Why would you volunteer that? I mean, obviously you feel that way about me, or you wouldn't have volunteered it.
Well, I mean, the best part of selling out is the money, as my friend loves to say. I feel bad now. So I'd love to hear from other folks, like if there were things like incentives that change behavior in other ways. I'm thinking back to like my early days at Sun, Brian, when Mike and you would like take the count of bugs that I had fixed and use this as like weapons to like compare to other groups of folks. And actually that was usually motivating for me to think like I would sit there, watching Law and Order endlessly on the weekends, like fixing random MDB bugs, because I was like fired up to like pad that count. And like bugs are not like a great metric or whatever.
It is funny. I thought of exactly that today, actually, because as I was thinking about like other ways in which engineers have been incentivized, because you could go in and say, look, we're going to pay you by the bug fix, or we're going to pay you by the line of code. It's just very easy to see how this becomes immediately perverse. Or actually, another example from Sun. Do you remember the patent rewards.
Oh yeah. No, that definitely changed our behavior for sure.
That did change behavior. And in fact, I still do. I still have. I think I still have at least one piece of furniture that was paid for with a patent bounty. I don't know that I
So
was.
So Sun would pay us
Yeah,
when we initially kind of filed a disclosure. There were different compensation structures, but it was something fairly lucrative, like $500 for basically filling in a web form,
that's right.
and then like $1,000 or $2,000 for actually getting the patent filed,
Right.
and then a piece of wood when you got it granted.
Yeah, and they changed that so because the granting process could take so long. So it actually, and I think this might have even happened before you joined. It used to be that they had this philosophy of like talk about perverse incentives. Well, the patent process takes so long. You really want to you want to front load the incentive, and you really want to incentivize people to file the invention disclosure, which is the internal disclosure inside of Sun before you get lawyers involved. And so that was like $2,000 for the invention for like the web form, and then it was like $500 for the patent granted. So you can imagine what might have happened.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
People, I mean, and it's like, and I actually didn't. I mean, I didn't do this certainly, but I discovered this when we had an issue on Jurassic, and this guy had this world readable directory of all of the disclosures he'd filed. And he'd filed like 300 disclosures. And it was disclosures for like things like, lavatory in hover car. You know what I mean? Where he's got, I mean, he would have these invention disclosures. And there's a question in the disclosure of like, have you reduced this to practice? Which is like such a terrible phrase. Like it's like this is reduced to practice. And of course, the answer for all of these things, like no, none of the hover car lavatories have been reduced to practice. All of these things have just been like shit he dreamed up and was getting like a decent amount of money for. So yeah, that's why they changed it.
I mean, it was a different era too, right? As we talked about 2 weeks ago when we were talking about RIM and BlackBerry, where like these patent trolls would pop up and sue you over something that kind of never really worked for them, but good enough.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Like Sun wanted a big patent portfolio, and they kind of got it as a result. But they definitely had to fine tune the incentives. And I was definitely thinking about what you're referring to is we had an office that was not very productive, and when everyone was working at a direct physical site. And what we showed was that you personally, as a new engineer at Sun, had fixed more bugs in the previous whatever it was 6 months than the entire office, like by far. I mean, it's not at all close. I didn't realize that you were actually changing your behavior as a result of that. That's kind of interesting.
I don't think I was, radically, like these were things I wanted to do anyway, by and large. Like I was fired up to do it. But like, yeah, it's like, I mean, it's like any kind of pat on the head, right? Like when you give people attaboys or you give people encouragement, like usually that turns into them doing more of the same thing. I mean, which is also why encouragement and praise need to be carefully thought about. I had a funny one. This is a little bit, I hope this is not too far out of bounds, but one time we had these two engineers. No, nothing to do with you. We had two. I think this is topical. So we had two engineers who, over Christmas, like stayed around, fixed some problem. This one I'm CTO Delphix, and the CEO, at an all hands, kind of recognized these two, gave them some award. I think it was like a patent, a stock grant, pardon me, and really called them out. And I had an engineer approach me a week later, and she was like, I just worked really hard beforehand and did everything I could to make sure we didn't have these kinds of problems. And so are you saying like you want me to skip Christmas? And so,
or are you saying that you like want me to like not actually like, why would I fix the foundation when I can be a hero because the building is this thing?
Yeah. And so it was an interesting one, right? Because it made me think about, and I'm not sure like there was a clearly right answer in that circumstance, but it did make me think a lot about like what you praise in public, like what you praise in public to get other people to see those kinds of effects, and what you praise in private because you appreciate the work, but don't necessarily want that to be set as the standard of the pattern. Like the V nodes as the metric for promoting someone to staff engineer.
Yeah.
Right. Like once you do that publicly, you raise the bar and make it hard for everyone else. Whereas if you tell them privately, this was terrific work and we really appreciate it, and the messaging publicly might be different. It sets different kinds of incentives and expectations.
Okay, that's interesting. Private versus public. Also, what about would she have felt the same way if the praise had been public, but there'd been no compensation associated with it?
Yeah, I think that might have changed things as well, right? Like appreciating someone's sacrifice without necessarily saying that there was like a cash prize or stock or whatever was attached to it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how, because I feel I do. One of the things I definitely wonder, because certainly, and those of you ex-Googlers can kind of chime in on this, but I feel like part of the big problem is that all of this stuff is tied to comp. So it's not just like, something that the culture values, but it's all like there's a direct pass through to compensation, and that then you start to compensation feels zero sum. If you're praised in an all hands and I'm not, I just feel like I'm less likely to be embittered by that than if you're compensated and I'm not. I feel it's like easier to be like, wait a minute, like there's a pie, it's finite. You just got a slice of pie. You just got a chicken sandwich that I can't get to put in bake sale pennies.
Yes, zero sum sandwiches. Yes.
But I wonder,
that's a good point.
Like how much of that is, and like how much of it also, I feel like this is this peril of. I mean, the bug example had occurred to me as well, because we did kind of open Pandora's box there a little bit, in that we cracked it open. I'd like to believe that we shut it quickly after that, but in many ways, it was confirming something that we already. Confirming is the wrong word. It was showing quantitatively something that felt very true qualitatively.
And for those listening, yes, this made me a lot of friends at that office.
Well, part of the thing that was dismaying about that, it came in through an kind of an acquisition. We had a VP that really liked to hire people. That was like actually talk about perverse incentives. That's a good one.
Yeah, totally. Right. Size of your org. Empire. Yeah.
And he was all about the size of his org. Like that was how and I think this is the way a lot of people measure themselves. And so he went and there was a company that was basically going to downsize a bunch of people, and he went and hired them all with in a total no huddle kind of fashion. And it was kind of, we had to take them all or none of them. And this is in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it's like, we can't find people anywhere. And so we ended up with a bunch of people that were not people we should have hired, is what it boiled down to. And in part because of this perverse incentive that he was incentivized to build his org instead of actually doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I think it also gets to why people do things, though. I mean, it's like what makes people feel good about the work they're doing, and where do you derive that satisfaction from? And I think if you make that too extrinsically motivated too much of the time, people get strung out on it.
Yeah, but I think a lot of what we're talking about is that still extrinsic motivation, right? Like even when you're saying that you like, and I share this feeling that I like doing things that my colleagues appreciate, that other people appreciate, right? Like I like building some random crate and seeing someone consume it that I've never seen before, right? I think those are extrinsic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is also this, I like the satisfaction of a job well done, and doing something beautiful. But I'll readily confess that I'm much more extrinsically motivated. I mean, this will come as no surprise to you as I show every scrap of code I've ever written when I was in my 20s to you or whatever, right. Requiring a firm pat on the head.
Right. That you're being too hard on yourself. But no, you're right. I mean, that even where we say there's intrinsic motivation, and there is, it is we have a colleague. I mean, I hold all of our colleagues in very high regard, but we hold a colleague whose highest praise, in my experience, is slick. That's slick. And I find those are serious Scooby stuff. Like you say, we call something you did slick, and it feels really good. But it feels good in part because it feels like that's it feels deep. You know what I mean? It feels earned. It doesn't feel like it's not just given out for anything. It is not
That's right.
cheapened. And it's not cheapened in part because it has there's nothing monetary associated with it. You know, he is under no obligation to issue a certain number of slicks per quarter. You know, he's not stack ranking the organization, figuring out how he can also give out an infinite number of slicks. You know, I mean, there's nothing.
Well, except for they do kind of devalue, right? You do get sort of slick inflation.
Slick inflation. Now that I say that, would actually be pretty. Though I would have to move to something else. It's true. It would be devalued. That is true.
Right. It did maybe, I don't know if you had this feeling, Brian, because I know when you left Sun, you were VP of Eng and then CTO. And, I had been like a manager and then a CTO and then later CEO and then now nothing. But it did make me think a lot about praise, right? And it changes. It's weird. It's weird how the things you say, both positive and negative, cast a much longer shadow. And it was, I was working for a CEO once who was very stingy with praise.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking and saying to him at one point, this is the cheapest thing that you have to give out, and it actually matters so much.
It matters so much. I agree with that. Yeah. So did I tell you when I got religion on this? When we you and I were together at an org inside of Sun, and we had a bunch of younger engineers, a couple of younger engineers, and Sun is collapsing. It's the fall of Saigon. You and I are running to the roof with all of our things, waiting to get helicoptered out. And I remember I was with 3 of the most junior engineers, one of whom still works with us today. And I was like, look, hey, I'm leaving. I just wanted to tell you, you 3 did a great job. And they were like, oh, good. Okay, that's really good to know. I'm like, what? And like, well, we kind of assumed we were doing a good job because, no one told us we were doing a bad job. But okay, that's good to know. We were doing a good job. They were kind of like, oh my God, did we screw up? I screwed up. I felt like I screwed up. I did not give you nearly enough. And so my big belief is like, if you are, and folks that have worked at Oxide have probably heard me say this, if you tell me something positive about someone else, I'll be like, tell them that. Make sure they know that. And I mean, praise shouldn't be disingenuous, but like, don't be stingy with it. If you're feeling something positive about someone else, say it for sure.
I have become much more a fan of praise, and not once have I said, you did a great job on this, or I really appreciate this, and have the person say, well, shove it. Like, I don't care. Like, exactly. That means nothing to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it's weird how just these kind words can mean so much to our colleagues, or to open source maintainers or whomever, because like people often don't go out of the way to give that praise, and it's a lot easier to give negative feedback.
Well, you also don't know. You're like, oh, okay, good, thank God, that is good. I wasn't sure. Like, I don't know. Are people using this? Was this a good idea? Is this working? Yeah. You just don't necessarily know. Satnam, you had your hand up, and Ken, you were joining us as well.
I think. I've been thinking what you've been saying about incentives and money, and I think of all my academic colleagues who clearly are not motivated by money. But yet they do great work. And so what is it there going on there? And I think part of that is you want the respect of your peers, right? And if you can create systems where that becomes a currency other than just your title and how much money you're paid, I think that would be like a kind of a better world. And anyway, a little bit what I was saying about giving people praise. Like, so the academic community has got all these prizes and awards for academics and students and postdocs and so on. So, but I think building systems where we have you can somehow trade respect rather than dollars, and maybe perhaps something to be learned from the academic community with that, because that's something I think that works very well. Where we don't care about their level. No one cares if you're an assistant professor or a full professor, and your salary is very low compared to what you could be earning in industry. So it's not all about money. I think how you are accepted and how you think your peers accept you and what they think of you. For a lot of us, I know for me, that's a very important and powerful thing.
Super powerful. I know that's a very good point. And I feel one of the challenges that we have and I think academia also suffers from this a bit, is do I cheapen myself if I praise your work? If I praise your work, am I saying that you are my intellectual superior in academia? And you really want to not get kind of caught up in that hierarchy, and know that you can safely praise someone else and not worry about it cheapening yourself. But yeah, you're right about that. It's certainly academics are not motivated by money, clearly, because they could make a lot more elsewhere. Are academics, how content are academics in your experience?
Yeah, so, I mean, I've just been off some threads. There's this one maddening thread on Twitter where someone said, he's an academic, and he said, how much money would a company have to pay you to make you leave academia? Which kind of like ticked me off. I mean, I wrote a kind of a snarky reply, because it was written on the assumption that I am doing a good thing as an academic, and I could sell my soul and go to the industry, and therefore would do bad things, but at least I'm being paid money to compensate for it. So I think I do come across a few academics that feel very unhappy about what they're earning, but only when they've just had to teach a giant class. Or
teaching is really hard.
Well, I mean, I know tons of. I mean, I used to be an academic. Clearly, I wasn't doing it. I was very motivated, very driven. I worked. The hardest I worked in my life was as a lowly paid academic. So clearly, something going in there other than the money. I think a lot of them are very content, but they will complain as their want about all the things that are not good. And in computer, I mean, most people's academics don't have a choice, right? They've chosen, like my sister is an academic in English literature. She's a professor at university. That she can't go and work for Google, right, with her qualifications. Most of our friends who are academics can, if they wanted to, right? They have that option. They can vote with their feet, and they don't, right? They stay as academics. So I think a lot of them are very content.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and I feel like teaching is one of these things that you also have to be. I mean, teaching obviously a big part of academia, and it's talk about like a very distant reward. And I know, I mean, we should all go back and thank the teachers that had the most impact on us, because I don't think they hear that frequently enough. Let's go to Ken and then to Ian, because Ken, I think you joined earlier.
Yeah, hi, can you hear?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think one of the things, so it is around visibility. So like a lot of bug work in general, and fixing and making systems more resilient, largely if you do it by yourself, tends to go unnoticed or be invisible unless you actively try to make it more visible. And one of the things I've noticed, I've been developing a chaos engineering program from the ground up, and it's you can have it be a team or a person that enables kind of the visibility in an organization to go to sort of fan out, to make that work a lot.
Hey Ken, we're kind of losing you, I think.
Okay, is this better, louder, worse?
We get. I mean, we blame Twitter Spaces, of course, and of course, also Adam. This could be the quirk where the recording is fine.
Oh yeah, I'll check that. I'll check that. Well, yeah, please continue, Ken.
Okay. So I found chaos experiments to just be a good way to put it in front of, to put like debugging and system resiliency in front of the eyes of both like product managers across teams.
Ken, sorry, I got to cut you off. I think you're unintelligible both to us and on recording. Sorry.
Although that is better, because we have had this failure mode where we are unintelligible to one another, but then totally intelligible to the recording. And if you go back and listen to the recording, we sound like we're having a stroke on the thing. So Ken, I think what you're saying, I'm getting kind of like every third or fourth syllable about how you make bug fixing more visible in an organization. And I think there are some actually interesting ways to go do that, and to make, how do you kind of uplift this? I mean, I do feel, Adam, like one of the things that we do try to do is you got to make a big deal out of things that are really hard, but don't look like a big deal. And bug fixing is one of those things. It's really hard, but it great. Like the system now works as well as I thought it worked before you did any of this. And I think it's incumbent upon an organization to really encourage that. But it's not easy. Ian.
Yeah, I would say to the academic line of argument, in terms of computer science academics, I think a lot of people churn out of that as a career path significantly earlier in their journey now than they did, say, even like 20 years ago or something, right? So a lot of people year 1, year 2 of their PhDs, or if they do complete a PhD, will churn out into industry at this stage because there's pretty significant financial incentives to do so, as well as the difference in the amount of freedom they get to pursue the work that they want to do has slimmed over the years, whereby industry is offering some pretty free form positions whereby you can pursue the kind of research that you want to do and publish it in public. So a lot of people, I don't, yeah, I think that if you are looking at people who are currently lecturers, they've already filtered out a lot of people at that point in the 4+ years of training that go up to that point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, actually, for whatever it's worth, for me personally, Adam, I feel like you also thought you were going to go in academic.
Yeah, I was pretty convinced. Yeah.
Well, are you still in the mode that I felt you were in for several decades, where you still believe that?
No, I mean, I know that I'm too old. If that's
okay.
If that's the
no. But okay, this is like a new development. I don't mean to make too big of a deal out of it, but this is like. I feel this is like one of you, like you had like there was an alternate timeline where,
yes.
Right.
I feel like there've been, I mean, like even as recently as like maybe 2015 or 16, I thought about, seeing if I could join Phil on his talk adventures down at Stanford and things like that. No, for sure.
And you had not yet used up your NCAA athletic eligibility for ultimate.
that was a factor. I will.
Right. I mean, that was part of like that particular alternate timeline, if I recall correctly.
Absolutely. That I would be like the old man on a frisbee team of 21-year-olds, thinking that I could school them, but actually just being run around.
Wait, but playing dirtier than they'd be willing to play, and throwing your visor much more frequently.
Absolutely.
Calling way more travels for sure.
For sure.
But so that at some point you realize, like, okay, I don't think I'm going to.
Well,
I mean, I think
how about this?
I say that. I'm actually not totally convinced the dream is dead for me either.
I was at my my older son's back to school night, and his physics and computer science teacher, same guy, went to MIT. In the 90s, worked in industry for a while, hated it, and has been teaching at the high school for 15, 20 years. And he made it sound so romantic that it sort of like breathed on those embers a little bit, because he clearly loves it and the kids love him. And I think there is something that, I love teaching, and like I get a lot of it in a lot of those same benefits from like working with colleagues and mentoring colleagues and over the years. But there is something that continues to be very romantic about, teaching, probably not in high school, but teaching in college.
It's potentially very high impact. I mean, you can really affect people's lives. You can change the direction of their lives. It's really great.
I mean, conversely, like pulling those, academics out of academia into industrial research, conversely feels also like it has a big impact. Like you're underserving, you're kind of eating the seed corn, like you're underserving those youth. So I think it's kind of complicated. Who are we eating? Are we seed corn eaters in this? That's a good question. No, I would say.
Are we just growing the food stocks for future generations in this metaphor? I'm trying to keep
I think like the folks who tempt great teachers and professors into industrial research so that they don't have to teach anymore. Yeah, a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, so I'll tell you the thing that turned me off about academia, that is still a bit of a turn off about academia for sure, is the novophilia, that everything, only the things that are new have merit. And it felt like it was few and far between the academic papers that I could see myself writing, with the ones that were actually going into implementation details didn't feel like they mattered anyway in the and this was part of the reason I loved the late Johann Lidke has got terrific papers because the implementation really mattered in those papers. I don't know if you've ever read any. Like,
No, I haven't.
It's really good stuff. But then I kind of fell in love with those, and then you realize, like, wait a minute, this is a sliver of and this is like when we went to AAT Puck, Adam.
Oh yeah.
We went to, we're such a bunch of jokers, where we went to this conference on debugging, and I'm like, we are going to the cathedral of academia. Like, this is the mecca for academia, because there can be no higher calling in academic computer science than working on debugging. And then we arrive there and realize that this whole community feels like they are like they're boat people, like they are adrift, like no one will take them. I mean, they're just like,
yeah, pariahs. And I don't
pariahs.
think that conference happened again. Yeah.
Right. And here we thought the conference happened infrequently because it was like the Olympics. It was like, you can't have the Olympics every year or you cheapen it. And it's like, no, we can't like get a venue most years. Like, we can't get. Yeah. So, Dan, you had your hand up.
Sure. First, a little side comment about industrial research. I'm going to take some exception to what Adam said. I mean, look at Bell Labs. They did Unix, C, the transistor, the laser. I mean, all of that stuff was side effects of industrial research, and it really has changed the world.
Well, hold on, Dan. Just to be clear, like, I'm not anti-industrial research. I'm just saying they're kind of two sides of the coin. That
Sure.
if you're taking someone out of academic research where they're, inspiring young minds potentially, and bring them into a different context, like, it's not purely, there's cost benefit in each. That's my only point. Not that I'm a Bell Labs denier.
Yeah, no, that's cool. No,
why would he say he's not Bell Labs denier unless he's a Bell Labs denier? I mean, obviously the guy.
No. I think it's just
do your own research.
More of a back and forth there, right? I mean, people will jump between industry and academia, and like the Bell Labs folks would talk to people in academia all the time, and they would go down to Princeton and teach classes and blah 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 blah. But I wanted to touch on the engineering incentive thing. So this all kind of kicked off, as near as I could tell, with this tweet about a Reddit comment, and I don't know who wrote that, the original Reddit comment, or what the context there was, but it was definitely a little bit misleading about the specifics of Google. So Google's big thing wasn't so much like you have to launch, it was you have to demonstrate impact. And the easiest way to do that was to launch something, for sure. And this, I think, is actually this speaks to this idea of like, well, how do you incentivize maintenance work? It is very difficult to demonstrate the impact of doing some maintenance, right? So there's this great novel by Bulgakov called The Master and Margarita. And long story short, very, very interesting novel. I highly recommend reading it. The sort of synopsis of the story is the devil comes to Soviet Moscow and has his grand ball in the 1920s. And the first order of business is to acquire an apartment. And he does that by basically killing somebody. And the way that this guy dies is this woman spills some oil on some trolley tracks. This guy is walking out of a park after almost convincing Satan that he doesn't exist. He slips on the oil and he gets decapitated by the trolley. All right. Now, like, why do I think this is relevant? Because if somebody could have just like bumped into this person and prevented the oil from spilling, then the guy wouldn't have died, and then Satan couldn't have had his grand ball in the novel, and then the world would have been deprived of this literary masterwork. The point being that you might make some very small change just during the course of one's day-to-day work, get that committed, and then that prevents a major outage 6 months or a year or 5 years down the road. You really have no way of knowing that, let alone quantifying it.
And this is The Master and Margarita, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, right.
I mean, with the cat, highly recommended.
Well, and I mean, just like actually, I mean, the value of like having an impact on a student, it's also, you don't know kind of years from now. And so, so Dan, how do you square that? Because I mean, we know that so much of that work has an enormous impact, and we want to encourage it. I mean, how do you do it?
I think that you have to make maintenance work an explicit thing that people like in organizations where there's a perf style evaluation. You have to make maintenance work an explicit thing that is rewarded.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to say, like, we will promote somebody for doing maintenance. And if you can demonstrate that you have somehow improved the code quality of, a library or whatever, you're going to get a promotion out of that.
Which can be problematic. I mean, certainly it was a really so at Sun, there was this distinguished engineer rank that was this basically country club that voted on its own membership. It was kind of outside of the normal promotion process. And it was a huge and contentious deal when the first field engineer became a DE, and it brought out the absolute positive worst in people. And for someone who was like indisputably technically qualified, but spent their life customer facing, which a lot of us would view as like very, very important. But it was really, there are a lot of people that don't believe that that's important.
And that's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I think that comes down to the culture that you're in and what you reward. So like, I love your example, Dan. I think it's even more important that you do it and show people and talk about it, even that you write it down a priori. Right? Like, you can write down all you want, but if people don't get promoted for these things, then, you know, that it sort of doesn't matter. But if you're promoting folks or rewarding folks or recognizing folks, and those are the accomplished, then people drift to them. I mean, there's another side of it where, you know, I've had, you know, at a previous role, I had someone working on our team come to me and say, well, what kinds of things can I need to do for the next round? Because it says that, you know, I need to, basically what we were looking for in this organization is folks who could help us see around corners and help us, like, you know, be broader. Like, we needed just more people being more thoughtful rather than just doing what they were told. And, you know, this guy came and asked, how can I do that thing?
So listen,
like, well,
I'm just coming to you to understand. I'm asking you to tell me how I should see around corners. Like,
right.
I don't know.
So it's sort of a tough thing. And he was doing great work, but it did sort of top him out in the organization. There was sort of a point at which we needed the independent thought and independent operation and leadership.
Yeah, interesting. But it was like, you also, like, you don't necessarily want everybody seeing around corners. I mean, you don't want it like, you know, sometimes you can overly enshrine some that kind of strategic thinking.
Absolutely.
And then discourage someone who's like, well, actually, no, I'm not going to go, you know, help this customer out or go debug this problem. I want to see around corners.
That's right. I mean, it sort of had to do with where did we feel short? You know, that we tried to align our incentives and based on where we felt shorthanded.
So here's a concrete example of what I was referring to. And I'm going to speak to this in generalities because I don't feel super comfortable talking about the specifics, but there was a team at Google that had a big maintenance problem. They were working with an upstream open source component and, you know, with a high rate of change, and pulling in those changes and merging Google specific changes back, well, not specific, but just Google authored changes back upstream was a big problem. And one night I happened to be eating dinner with a couple of the senior engineers from that team. And I said, look, why don't you take like 4 people and say you have a year to figure this out, get as many of our internal patches as possible upstreamed and figure out a more streamlined process. And at the end of the year, you will all get promoted. And it was like I had just suggested, you know, kicking a puppy or something. I mean, you know, like the other folks around the table just kind of looked at me like I had said, you know, something very offensive. It was, and it was clear that wasn't going to fly. But to me, it seemed like a pretty decent idea.
Interesting. And you got like, hey, look, everyone knows you got this this problem is like well known. Everyone knows this is an important problem. I'm just proposing a way for you to use the extant incentivization structures to solve the problem. Like, it feels very reasonable.
I mean, as another former Googler, right? Like, there's periodically these tweets that go around that are like, hey, senior folks in engineering, like, talk about your times where you did something that caused a major problem so that the new folks, when they inevitably do something that takes down production, it's not, you know, completely foreign. And I usually describe a case where I made a typo in a regex and it got deployed to all of Google and ended up taking out 2 whole clusters for multiple days.
And clusters, in the sense, are not small.
No, we're talking order like tens of thousands of machines.
Yeah, wow.
Good job,
but the thing is like, coming back to the impact side, while I offer that as an example of like where I took down production and it wasn't a big deal, the other side was it actually served as this way of demonstrating how much impact there was behind the software I worked on, such that the postmortem of why did this happen and how could we prevent it in the future actually finally provided a path for folks on my team to be promoted.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So you were able to provide some visibility into like, hey, this is why this stuff is really important. And presumably there were a bunch of the things, and Rick, I imagine this what came out in the postmortem, some of the, I would presume some of the infrastructure that you could deploy to prevent this kind of thing happening is probably something that people wanted to build and felt like they couldn't because it didn't have enough visibility.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, for that specific one, it gave enough air cover to go out and figure out what a proper plan would be to make this more sustainable. And it turned out to be a 7-year long plan to eliminate a core piece of the Google server software stack and infrastructure stack and replace it with an alternative. And, like, there are people who got their promotions off of a project that I started that I never met.
Okay, so the plan. Okay, 7-year long plan. I've got some follow-up questions. Was that a 7-year long plan at the outset? It's just like
no,
okay.
it's just the realities of the complexity
right.
of it was a core piece of the infrastructure that nobody quite understood how it was interacted with from everywhere, and so everyone was afraid of changing it. So
Right.
you end up with this in like all sorts of organizations. There's also that XKCD comic of like, here's the giant tech stack and here's the one component that's written by this person in Nebraska, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing, except that you don't necessarily know where that component is or who else relying on it. So making those changes, like it's hard to understand what the impact is, but you also run into fear around making changes to things that you suspect have a lot of impact. So there becomes this, we don't want to disrupt things too much. So working on a potentially impactful project can also be held back from fear of causing too much breakage.
Totally. Well, but Rick, there's another interesting thing there that is, not to bag on Google too much, because it's all the fact that Google had a culture, if not like metrics around doing the postmortem. Because there would be other companies that would not do a deep understanding of why that failure happened, and they would just punish those involved and move on. But to Google's credit, like it sounds like, really want to understand why this failure happened, dig deep, get a full rigorous postmortem. Because I do feel like that's another way to kind of enshrine the importance of some of this unseen infrastructure, is to make sure that failures themselves are really important to fully understand.
You make it sound glamorous. The reality of the situation was definitely much more having a culture of writing postmortems meant that I could actually stand up and say, we should write a postmortem for this. And that I still had to take on that, like recognize that was important and take on the role of actually writing it and writing down things that I knew were going to be inflammatory to a lot of folks and sending it out to fairly senior folks so that they saw the problems that were actually there. So it was partly that the culture gave enough ways to that you could do it, but you were still taking somewhat of a risk of actually going through with the process. And I mean, that's not like, we're getting a little off topic, but it was like there are a lot of incentives and disincentives throughout the company culture, and you have to be able to pick and choose like which incentives you're going to follow and which disincentives you're going to ignore to be able to actually accomplish something and be able to use that as demonstration for longer term incentives. It becomes its own like muddled mess of trying to navigate the incentives.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then what's interesting, like also like what are the incentives to change the way things are incentivized? Because I do feel that you also have this very much this kind of this confirmation bias for those that do well in a particular system, reward that, so that they want to keep that. I mean, Satnam, to go to your academic point, those that came up through the system of tenure are going to be loath to give that kind of job security out without people going through the same things that they went through. And so how do you kind of incentivize people to improve the system? I think it's another one that's pretty thorny. That's a good answer to that one.
Yeah, you've probably seen this, Brian, in like executive compensation, where boards of directors just want to kind of all these executives' pay go up and up and up, and this is why one of the ratio between the CEO and the average employee has increased dramatically. But some of it is just believing in the system of incentive and going around the table and rewarding each other.
It does seem to be that. I mean, and you have these things that have got nothing to do with an executive's performance that form a huge amount of their compensation. And yeah, it does seem to me that you are some of these comp committees. I do not understand why you've got the kind of the way they operate. And I guess it's the belief that the executives are creating heaven and earth underneath them, which is not always the case.
Absolutely, but it's other executives making those kinds of decisions, so kind of buying into that cargo cult.
Totally. Christopher, you're trying to get in here.
Hey there. So I've had the academic experience for about 20 years, into my late 40s. And just about incentivizing young people. We took on a lot of summer students and summer interns and co-op interns. The key there was getting the team of experienced people together, writing out on the whiteboard all the nagging little things we wanted to do and sorting them into sort of short 3-week, easy to do topics, and then longer 3-month-ish, little more challenging topics, and divvying them up so that incoming youngsters would have what we call the quick win. That was the 3-week project that could be done after a week of intensive training and a bit of hand holding, and then putting them on that 3-month longer project. And the point of that is incentivization is that the win itself is the incentive, and to give them that early win was key. Now, I'm in my late 50s now, and I left academia. I put 12 PhDs out on the market, and that's way more than my optimal reproduction number. So. And half women, half men. So
that's great. Hey, there you go.
So now I'm working incidentally with a bunch of ex-Bell Labs guys at Ericsson, and I no longer have to play the smartest guy in the room, because I'm not.
It's very liberating to not be the smartest person in the room. I found, speaking as the
Absolutely.
person who is emphatically not, is very it's lit, and it would. That's okay. So that's another interesting. I mean, you raised a bunch of interesting points in there. I do feel that there's a danger when people are vying to be the smartest person in the room. That particular incentive can get very toxic very quickly. Where you are now like, I am incentivized to now actually like shit on your idea so I can make sure that you're not the smartest person in this particular room.
And for one of the clues of why I left academia was I was working at the National University of Singapore for 6 years. They capped my salary payable to software guys to a point where I couldn't recruit. And so I could get all this grant money, no problem, but they wouldn't let me spend it at a level to recruit the kind of people I needed. So I had to set up my operations such that I had to work exclusively with trainees, and I had to adapt to that.
Interesting.
That was not. As I said, I got tired of being the smartest guy in the room after 6 years of that.
Well, and so the other thing you mentioned I thought was interesting was certainly the finding the quick win, which I definitely think is important. I think that you guys got to find that quick win, and then you need what's the medium-sized win behind it. So you're not going from the quick win to okay, great, now jump in the deep end and struggle. You got to kind of find that. But I always believe that you should give interns the projects that are really exciting that no one has the time to really go into. I always felt that was a lot more interesting than giving them, which sounds like you're kind of those 3-month projects that are more speculative in nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is great, because I think it generates a much more. I don't know, Adam. I mean, you did
for sure. I mean, and I did the same thing after it had been done to me, and I agree. I think it's more interesting time, and you have everyone excited about it, right? You sit down at the lunch table, you tell people what you're working on, and a lot of people have spent their spare time thinking about it, so they can offer useful mentorship, as opposed to slogging your way through some early bug. It is interesting thinking about the psychology both of ramping people up and incentives. It's got me thinking, Brian. I don't claim to know many psychological experiments, but my favorite is they give all these monkeys cucumbers, totally happy eating cucumbers, and then they give a bunch of other monkeys bananas, and the monkeys with cucumbers take the cucumbers and throw them at the researcher. And I feel like we get a fair bit of this with like incentives and raises, right? The raise,
Totally.
like the job I had was fine, and now you gave a banana to this numbskull. Like,
Absolutely.
This is what I think you're a cucumber.
You say you can take your cucumber and shove it.
That's right.
Incoming cucumber. No, I definitely feel what a great. First of all, I was spending most of your retelling trying to figure out: am I the monkey in this metaphor? Am I the cucumber? Who am I? Where am I? I know that I'm here. I just don't know. But no, I totally agree with you. And you can get people to care about things that they actually wouldn't otherwise care about because you've introduced scarcity. And it's like. No, this group over here has this and you don't. You kind of create all of these things that all of a sudden people start behaving in ways that you don't necessarily want them to behave. It's not actually conducive to it's not actually what you're trying to do.
Well, sorry, and same thing with baselines, right? Like how many prospective colleagues have we talked to who were too hooked on their megalocorp salary to get about? And in a lot of cases, they don't necessarily need that, and need is a weird word to use with regard to money, but it means like it's not necessarily built into their lifestyle. They're not need to pay to support their family or whatever, but it feels like taking something away, and I guess it is taking something away. But that same job offer before they had that experience would have been much more compelling. So like the way we sort of bank what we've already got as the new baseline. Both when it comes to compensation and title and all of these things, it becomes very hard to step backwards.
Yeah, I mean, and I think other people should do this as well. One of the things that we ask people when they apply to Oxide is, when were you happiest and why? And it's never based on a promotion or compensation. When we ask people when you were happiest and why, it is always based on I solved this problem that this other group needed, or that I did this thing that had intrinsic satisfaction or brought satisfaction to others. It's got nothing to do with the kind of the currency of the realm. I should say, every once in a while you do get people who are surprisingly reviewing in that regard, and you realize like probably not a fit. But it is actually important that we should all kind of figure out, like, when was I happiest and why? When was I unhappiest and why? Where are my true incentives? And I think figuring that out, and then figuring that out for other people, and kind of trying to align all of that with what we want to actually go do, while not creating, bugs that get created spuriously so we can close them, or products that we create spuriously so we can kill them, or what have you.
Right. That's
the trick. Adam, I know we want to keep. We're trying to end on time these days. How are we doing?
We're doing great.
Great. Okay. Good. It's been a great discussion. It's been interesting.
Yeah.
I think that we can agree that there are things that we want to avoid. That we didn't mention the cobras in India. I would love to know if you've heard of that. The British in India wanting to eradicate cobras, offering a bounty for cobras, and then people started breeding cobras.
Of course. I didn't know that. That's such a great one.
It's a great one. I just need to. I would love to get because it's kind of this like Malcolm Gladwell-esque knowledge. You know what I mean? Where it's like, God, that feels so great. Like, is that true? I hope that's
what I was going to say. I was going to say I choose to believe that it's true, because it's true. Because I definitely want to drop that at lots of occasions.
Yeah, because it's great, and I think that there's a lot of cobra breeding that happens, and we want to avoid the cobra breeding when we incentivize engineers.
Yeah, but man, it gets hard. It gets hard, especially as teams grow, and you lose touch with what is motivating people and who's not being praised sufficiently and who's being praised more than the rest of the company thinks or whatever. It just, I don't know that there's a silver bullet.
God, let's just hope that future generations of Oxide engineers are coming back to this recording and be like, when did demo day get so fucked up around here? Like,
you take these cucumbers, buddy.
Exactly. That's right. All right. I think so. We do want. I know I said this last week, but I think we are going to come up to one that we want to actually schedule on European time. So I think we'll get our actually act together this coming week, Adam, to get that done.
Is that like a commitment? Like a week from today, European hours, go.
Okay, I can see where this is going, and I agree. I have dropped the ball here. Okay, I get it. Yes. Let's huddle. Let's figure it out. I want because what I want the open source, the firmware folks to be able to join. So I need to check it with them. So
stay tuned. Watch this space.
Stay tuned. Watch this space. All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next time.
Thank you.